All right, we're here at the Focus, and today we have musical composer genius, longtime friend of mine. Her name is Maria Molinari, and I met her back when I was a amateur journalist back in the day, and I did an interview with her, and now she's back. Years later to talk to us about her career and her journey. And of course, she's got a new film where she's done the score for, and it's called Abhorrent, right? Mm-hmm. And but before we get into that, let's talk about how you got into musical composition and your inspiration and how you took the steps to become who you are today.
Okay. Well, like most musicians, I started really young. I was lucky. I came from a musical family where music was important, and my aunts were there was an opera singer, there was a pianist, so there was respect for that, and it was like a no-brainer. I was going to be involved in music. Mm-hmm. So it was choirs, in school.
All right, we're here at the Focus, and we have director Zach Gain.
I got into band, and I was in the Toronto Children's Chorus, which would perform, and still does actually perform with the Toronto Symphony, and that was an amazing experience. I had a fantastic first music teacher, Jean Asworth Gam was her name at the time. And her standards were so exacting and so high, and we recorded. And just had wonderful experiences. She really set the standard. And from there I went and studied classical guitar at the conservatory, and eventually went into the Faculty of Music at the U of T, mm-hmm. and did a theory degree. And just, realized that I had, as a classical guitarist, there really isn't an avenue for you out there. It's not like you graduate and you might, if you do a performance degree, you go into a symphony orchestra. Mm-hmm. There are avenues. They're extremely competitive, mm-hmm. so there's no guarantee. But I was trying to decide toward the end of my degree, what am I going to do? And one of my classmates said that he'd really love to work in film. And I thought, the light bulb went off. Because at the time in Toronto, there was a film industry, but certainly there wasn't much discussion of who was scoring mm-hmm. these productions. So that wasn't, and I think also at that time, people were kind of looking down at film music as opposed to realizing that it's art. Mm-hmm. It really is art, and these are highly skilled, talented people mm-hmm. Doing a very demanding job in a very short period of time. Mm-hmm. So at that point, the light bulb went off, and I spent a little more time studying composition because I was doing composition at the U of T as well, mm-hmm. and thought I really have to work on my chops a little bit more. So I continued my studies privately. And then I applied to USC, the University of Southern California in Los Angeles, to their film scoring program, got in, and did that, which was an amazing experience. And I studied with people like Elmer Bernstein, who scored To Kill a Mockingbird, mm-hmm. and Christopher Young, who's still with us and scoring films. He did Spider-Man 3, mm-hmm. got his start in horror films. Things like Hellraiser, I think, was the big start mm-hmm. for him. And Leonard Roseman, who scored Rebel Without a Cause and East of Eden. So nice. It was a wonderful exposure to people working at the top of the game, right? Mm-hmm. And then after that, I spent time in LA and time in England, and then made my way back here to Canada, where I've been writing for film, TV, concert music, and commercials as well.
So what was your first gig in terms of film?
My first gig was thanks to Glenn Morley, who's a composer in town, and it was my first professional gig, and he was doing a show called Freaky Stories. He was musical directing, he was scoring some of them, but part of it was that he was giving a shot to young upcoming composers, and they were 5-minute vignettes.
Okay.
5-minute stories, and I have a couple of them actually up on my website. I don't think I have the whole thing, probably a scene. And it was immensely popular, and they were really cute, and each vignette had its own musical identity. Mm-hmm. So he chose composers based on their strengths. Right. This one needs a jazz score, so that person gets it. This one needs this. So So that was my first gig, and it was a lot of fun.
Nice. So talk about, for example, for this film, Abhorrent, like talk about the process of how a composer actually gets to become a composer for a film. So
Right.
like the whole process, if you can explain that.
Sure.
For this film, yeah.
Well, for this film in particular, I'd actually met David, I think about 20 years ago. He used to live across the street from me. and I met his co-director on a previous film that I scored. I met him through WIFT, Women in Film and Television Toronto. He was a member, and then we discovered that, David, who was his co-director, and I think they wrote the script together also, lived across the street from me. So I developed a relationship from then. it was some years later, I think it was about 7 years later, they completed their short and needed a composer, and Sheldon said, that's, I know someone. So I did that, and then I did their feature, and I co-wrote that with another composer, Rohan Staten. I brought him in, and we worked together on that. And then David had this new short, and he, dropped me a line and said, "Hey, are you available?"
Mm-hmm. So why don't we take a look at that,
Sure.
the clip that you brought in,
Yeah.
and Rob will pull that up.
Okay. Just, I guess, a little as a precursor before we run it, maybe.
Okay, go ahead.
Yep. Before we run it, it's. I had a spotting session with David, and David had sent, before you start working on a score, I like to get inside the composer's head. And of course I already, not the composer, sorry, the director's head, and know what they like. And I already had an idea of the kind of music that David likes and that he might envision in being a horror film. There's some, expectations already set up. But when we had the spotting session, which is when we sit down, we watch the film, we determine when is it going to come in, when is the music going to come out, what do you want me to support or highlight, what do you want me to stay away from. And he mentioned that he really loved the cello, and I know that was one of the questions that you sent to me about Tree Adams and how he says that it's like the human voice. And David mentioned that he really loved the cello, so I made a mental note. Of course, he was really nice about it. He said, no pressure, you don't have to use it. Yeah. But it's such a wonderful, warm instrument, and it can be very emotional. And I find it sits nicely under dialogue. So the scene that we're going to see from Abhorrent is the scene of the basic story is there's this mother, she has 2 sons, and she has a husband who's up to no good, and she's trying to save them from going down the path of her where her husband is leading them. And the older boy is already kind of has one leg in there already. Yeah. And the younger boy is still very innocent. So this is a scene between the mother and the 2 boys. And she's sitting them down and having a little heart-to-heart conversation about what's going to be happening without saying what's going to be happening. And just kind of comforting them and reassuring them. And it's really about, like, she's the heart of the film. And so I identified her with the cello, which is very much the heart of her. And so I set it up with, you can hear kind of a bell-like piano. I think I used a celesta and some bells, and that kind of represents the innocence of the boys, or the innocence that she's trying to preserve. Wow. Yeah. And the cello comes in, which represents her, as she goes and reaches out to touch one of her sons. And so now it's set up, and now you can see the film.
All right, let's take a look.
Come on, boys. Please, sit. Look, I need you to stay right here. Don't move. Someone will come for you, and it might be a while, but just stay put, okay? No matter what you hear. Simon, I need you to be Mama's special boy, okay? Look after your brother.
It's in you now, Mama. This is the one.
It'll be okay. It's gonna be okay.
So, on the subject of the cello, and then what I was asking you before, and how that's to the one composer that I mentioned that it sounds like a human voice, as he says. So if you can expand on that, or like explain that, or what instrument do you find that has that human voice when you're doing composition and music composition?
Well, yeah, the cello definitely. I think I once spoke to Conrad Bloemendahl. He's a local cellist. He used to play with Glenn Gould, and he was the one who said to me, I think that the appeal of the cello is that it is in the human register, in the human voice. You can actually sing a cello melody, and that's why it resonates so much with people. I think, it's really warm, and I found that there was a real warmth that really conveyed that extra layer of emotion in that scene for me when she goes to reach out to her son and the cello comes out and it represents her, and she's really the warmest character on screen, and she's the most emotional. And that connection, she's trying to convey that love to her children. And so from that perspective, I think it really connects beautifully with the character and adds that extra level of emotion to who she is. It sonically represents what's going on inside.
Yeah. So how many, as I spoke to this beforehand, how many instruments do you usually have going on at the same time in one sequence?
Depends. That's one of the things, when I first started writing, I realized how little I knew about actually scoring a scene, even after doing the program at USC, that you really have to, you get better as you do it. And the first times you try, it's that idea of knowing how much is too much and how much is enough, and how to sneak it in so that it's imperceptible. There's a saying that the best film score is the one you don't notice. Right? Because you don't notice when it comes in. It just comes in organically, and it leaves organically. And there are times when I watch a show, and I'll say, that was a really great, that was a great cue. And I need to go back to watch it again, because I know it really resonated with me emotionally, but I need to find out, like, how did they do it? Because I don't even remember when it came in. The emotion, the turns were great. How did the composer do that? So it's not about numbers of instruments, it's about the right instruments. And the right amount of, and telling the story. At the end of the day, as film composers, we are filmmakers, because we're guided, our structure is the film, and the film is boss, the director is boss, where it's all about you. So yeah, it really varies. It depends upon the project. I finished in the summer, it's coming out in the new year, a film called To the New Girl, and it's a film adaptation of a stage play by Samantha Motcher, and it's a critically acclaimed play, wonderful play. It's basically 10 little stories, and it's women writing letters to the new person in their ex's life. And the direction I got from the producer, we started first with just the opening theme, and she said, if we get this right, everything else will fall into place. And the direction that she gave me was that she wanted it to sound like it was coming from the venue, because it's shot like it's an open mic night. So it's on stage, and it's just the actors and the microphone, and that's it. So in that environment, I knew, okay, she wanted to come from the environment. Well, what would be appropriate? Well, I imagine a piano, I imagine a double bass player, probably a drummer, percussionist, a guitarist. And then for added color, I put things in like an accordion and a fiddle player. You know, little things easily transported that make sense in a small venue like that. What kind of house band would you have? So that decided that. And then other you know, productions, it's like you can do whatever your imagination tells you is right. If you want to use a full orchestra, then you use that.
Talk about the actual, I mean, there's a lot of musicians out there who, in terms of using the software that they use at home, and talk about the learning curve that you had to learn throughout time, and you know, like updating software like Logic and or maybe Fruity Loops, but not. But like what you had to experience when it comes to software and technology.
I'm still experiencing. We experience all the time. The rule of thumb, I remember being told, never ever incorporate a new piece of gear into your system when you're in the middle of a project. Don't ever do that. I started, I remember when we were at USC, we had like a tech class, and it was impossible to do it effectively because it was, everybody had different gear, whereas now I think we've kind of come together and decided, I mean, people use different things, like I use Logic personally, some people use Performer, other people use, I think Hans Zimmer uses Cubase, if I'm not mistaken. And then some people like Pro Tools as well. So there is some variety, but at the time when I first started, I had a program called Opcode Vision, and it was my first experience. I was a real Luddite, you know. I got my first little laptop. It was a Mac Duo 230. It's now a glorified desktop, doorstop. And I had Opcode Vision, and it wasn't playing nicely with the keyboard that I had, my Roland. So ideally, it was supposed to be able to tell me what sounds I was calling up on my keyboard in the software, and all it did was come up with numbers. So it was like, okay, I need a piano. I'll try number 39. Oh, it's a kazoo. Okay, so let's try another. Oh, that's an accordion. You know, so I completely kind of gave up on the technology at that time, and just stuck to pencil and paper, which was where I came from anyway. So that was perfectly natural for me. But working in this industry, you know, you have to be able to mock things up to do a synth version if you're, with samples now. And so I moved over to Performer, and Performer didn't play nicely with plugins at the time. It would just kind of spit up blood whenever I'd use a plugin, because plugins were it used to be off-board gear, so you use samplers and the like, and synthesizers, but the whole software internal inside the box libraries was starting to come in, and I was using I think it was a Mach 5 software synth and plug-in, and it was just 5 instruments, and it was just not doing well. So, you know, then I did Giga Studio for a while, and that had to be housed in a PC, which of course promptly got infected with some sort of virus. And I noticed that my colleague was using Logic. We were both working for another composer on a series, and I was constantly having grief, and he was just like smoking a cigarette. It was like, this is no problem, never a problem with his gear. So I switched over to Logic at that time. And from that point, I don't have any outboard gear, really. I have a sound card and a MIDI, MIDI interface, but everything else is in the box, and lots of hard drives, so there's that.
So do you have, in terms of genres of films, do you have ones that you're comfortable with, or are there ones that you find really challenging to do, or is it all about the scene?
Well, I never envisioned, when I first started, I really envisioned myself doing dramas, and I wanted to do a historical costume drama. That was where, and then I found that I was being offered a lot of comedies, and I didn't know the first thing about writing for comedy. And comedy, music isn't inherently funny. It's about getting the right timing in comedy, and keeping the pacing complementary to what is going on screen. And I think that comedic scoring is really underrated. I think, wow, when it's done well, it's brilliant, and it really supports the scene, and it makes it even funnier because the music is so connected with it. So yeah, I started very much in comedy, and then I've done a little bit of drama and a bit of, we were talking earlier about End of Days Inc., which is a comedy sci-fi.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really want to do like an action film or a thriller or a historical drama would be great, but those are incredibly expensive and don't come around very often. But a thriller, that kind of thing. I've done horror. And animation is fun. It's a lot of fun, definitely. Yeah.
Nice. So let's take a look at End of Days Incorporated, and before we play it, tell us about the set it up for us.
I'll set it up. So it's about a bunch of people working for a company, and they're a bunch of office drones, and they're just kind of following orders until they realize that maybe the boss and the boss's sister who are running the company are up to something a little bit more sinister than they originally thought. And so the scene that you're going to see is a montage toward the end of the film. It's called Dawn is the Deadline, and it features this work music. I was told by the director, Jennifer Liao, we need this work music. We have several sequences where the workers are working and there's no dialogue. It needs to be scored. So right off the top, there was a scene of work music which kind of sets up each of the characters and the course of the day, from the energetic beginning to the post-lunch lull to the last bit of energetic push to the end of the day. And so this music is now in its, third evolution by this point in the film. And it's the work music, but there's an intensity to it because they realize that they're now trying to undermine the agenda of their boss, and they've got until dawn. And it's kind of the progression of this whole thing and what psychologically the characters are going through. So we have Mark O'Brien, who plays Jason, and he's a real high energy guy. And I originally, in the opening sequence, I had him under these Gene Krupa type, crazy drums, because he's a go-getter. He's going to rise in this company, right? And he has this moment of reflection, and the music, the driving element of the music pulls back there, and it also pulls back at another scene where it's Carolyn Maraghi plays Janet, and she's looking at a picture of her Nana and reflecting on what is going to happen and what that means for her Nana, and is she going to see her again? And then we have Mr. Godfrey at the end, and he's the boss, and he's sinister. And often with sinister, like you think of things like the Witches of Eastwick and whatnot. We tend to so the violin has been associated with evil, evil characters an awful lot. So I had the violin with him, and it kind of comes back in a very aggressive fashion, and the cue ends in a very dark place. And one last character, Paul Sun-Hyun Lee, plays Mort, who's in full zombie mode by this point. And
nice.
And I use the bassoon, which is a wonderful instrument, but it also, in the right register, can sound really kind of dorky and goofy.
Yeah.
And so I had that associated. So there were definite instrumental associations within this cue. And just energy peaks and lows depending upon what I was trying to convey about the psychology of the moment for the individual characters. So I think that's it.
Yeah.
That's everything. Yeah.
Let's take a look.
Okay.
That's what Godfrey said. What time does the sun rise?
This guy.
Yeah,
He
Paulino.
reminds me of Kevin O'Leary a little bit.
Yeah, it's Paulino Nunez, a really fine actor.
It is time to stop working. It is also time to collect your severance bonuses. Stop by the office.
Is there it's weird because like when I was growing up in the 80s, when I would watch certain films like The Untouchables and Full Metal Jacket and what else is really resonant, like RoboCop and then Predator, they had that like especially The Untouchables with Ennio Morricone's like it's very intense, like the beginning credits and stuff. But it's weird though, like as time moved on, there's been like less films where I don't really, where the composition, the musical scores don't really hit me as much. Is there a reason why that most films that like, for example for myself, it actually hit me during the 80s, or is there a different thing that they were using back then that made a much more of an impact on the audience? Or
Well, I think, when we're kids, when we're really young, there are certain experiences that really imprint very, very strongly. Like, I still remember vividly, like John Williams, sitting there and watching The Empire Strikes Back for the first time and hearing the Empire theme, which is really derived from Russian music, which is something I love. And the chills up my spine, because it was the first time I'd really heard anything in that style. In my house, we heard a lot of music, but it was always Beethoven and Mozart and Haydn and Handel, and, the classical composers. And whereas this was more 20th century in feeling. And it really imprinted on me. And the Star Wars, score as a whole, because there'd been a tendency at that point to go more toward, I guess, jazz scores, synthesizers that also started to enter into the environment, and John Williams kind of dragged it all back to the orchestra again.
Right.
And it was kind of a revival after that from John Williams. But I think, I know for me there were certainly some composers that really struck me at that age and that have stayed with me, like even Thomas Newman. I remember the first score of his that I heard, I came across by accident. It was, everybody was in bed in my house, and I was flicking through the channels, and I was a kid in high school, and I came across the film Less Than Zero with Robert Downey Jr.
Oh my God, that's one of my favorite films.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
And the score, and I just remember.
Oh, I'm gonna watch that over again.
Oh, it just hit me like a wall, and I remember.
When he's in the swimming pool,
It's the whole thing, and I just remember going, because everybody was in bed and I couldn't turn it up, going right up to the television set and like sitting right in front of it so I could hear this, and just marveling at his just the sonorities, and he's really amazing in that he has that voice, and he does some the wonderful work that he's done, like Shawshank Redemption that we all know. I love his score for Little Women from the 90s. They're one great melody after the next. It's absolutely delightful. And there's another Tom Hanks film that I keep thinking of, and I can't remember what the name of it is.
The Burbs?
She did no. It's set in the 20s, gangster. I can't remember right now. It'll come to me.
Road to Perdition or something like that?
That's the one. That's the one.
We got it.
And the theme, yes, thank you. The theme that he has for the Jude Law character, that's kind of, he's a really twisted character, and he's got this kind of detuned instrument. It sounds distorted and twisted like the Jude Law character is. So yeah, I think there are a lot of wonderful composers still happening now. I mean, I think of even Hildur, and her last name, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but the woman who did Chernobyl and the Joker, and she's got a very interesting voice. And Johan Johansson, who's no longer with us, I really love his work as well. There are a lot of wonderful composers. James Newton Howard is fabulous. I really love his score for The Sixth Sense. It still resonates, and the way he uses the textural approach to the orchestra in that film. And that's one of the wonderful things about these suspense films and horror films, is that you can actually put music up in those films that perhaps someone wouldn't want to just listen to it in the room, because it's so dissonant and it's more soundscapey, and in some ways it can also be very, very abrasive. And the front runners of music like that were the concert composers like Ligeti and Penderecki, and I remember Christopher Young at USC introducing us to that, and we'd all kind of come across it, and I think I really wholeheartedly rejected that kind of music because I didn't want to listen to it. But then he's showing us this in context.
Absolutely.
In context of film, and I just watched that, and I saw that, and I heard it, and I thought, of course. I mean, you couldn't score that in any other way. It makes perfect sense. So you have this heightened appreciation for that kind of what's called aleatoric writing, which can be very random writing, where you give some pointers to the musicians, and then they kind of interpret what's on the page. So, I think I've gone completely off in a different direction from your question. I'm not even sure what the original question was. But basically, I think that there are some really wonderful composers out there still doing. I think it's just that certain things imprint on us at certain times. And we carry it with us, and we still remember that. And I mean, and there are times when I think, oh, I'm going to go back and listen to that thing that I really liked way back then. And I'll listen to it, and I go, oh, what was I thinking? And then something else that I remember I rejected. I listened to it and I think, what was I thinking rejecting that? It's absolutely incredible.
So what do you think about screening the film with the orchestra as they're doing it, like the Meridian Center, which is formerly the Sony Center, and
it's called the Meridian now.
Yeah, it's Meridian.
Okay.
and the Roy Thompson Hall with like Home Alone and those others.
Yeah. I think it's a great idea. It's fantastic. I think it gets people back into the concert hall experience, which I think, a lot of people, as we were speaking earlier about this, are really intimidated by the idea of going to listen to a symphony orchestra. And part of it is the fact that I think the attention span, the demand of going in, listening to something you don't know, that goes on for over an hour, Mahler's Symphony or some such thing, Bruckner, and it requires such an intense concentration, and it can be very intimidating. And of course, it's also been kind of portrayed as being a very highbrow form of entertainment. So I think anything that brings people in and creates a connection for them with the orchestra, so that they realize, whether it's game music or film music, that they realize you're actually listening to an orchestra. It's actually resonating. It's actually resonating with you. It's not as high, as highbrow as you think, and hopefully it will also create curiosity in the audience to go and listen to some concert works and keep the orchestras alive, because I know that symphony orchestras have been suffering terribly. It's been a really tough time for them.
I remember interviewing one of the composers for those films. Sorry, I forgot his name, but he said that they don't really practice at all, and then they just come in like all the players, and they just start playing.
Yeah.
Like they have like a 2-hour practice or something, but these people just know what they're doing.
Oh yeah.
And then right away it's like, and there's like 80 of them, or not 80, like maybe like 40 of them. And it's so mind-blowing that these people don't practice at all.
Yeah. Well, that's because they've been practicing since they were 3 years old.
Yeah.
And their sight reading is at such a level that, they have a couple of hours of rehearsal and they can pull it off. And part of it is economics. You've got to pay players for rehearsals. And since the budgets are smaller and smaller, because the audiences can be smaller and smaller as well. There's less money, and so they have to do it in a condensed period of time. And luckily, you know, credit to all these fine orchestral players who can actually pull that off. And when you record a film score, they're doing it on the spot. You might have a couple of takes, a few takes. I remember even at USC when we did our big orchestral piece, I was amazed at the level of musicianship. And these were students, the student orchestra, but they were clearly being groomed. They were amazing. You know, they'd been selected because they were such great players. That's why they'd gotten in to begin with. But I think there was also that idea of it's a viable kind of work to go work in the studios. And if you're going to work in the studios, you better be a great sight reader. And I was just amazed at the way they played the piece down the first time around. And, you know, anything that I had to say from the podium was just like, you know, trombones, don't be so polite. You know, go for it.
Right.
And same to the percussionist. You know, but you know, there were no bad notes. There was no, you know, it didn't fall apart. There was none of that. They're just amazing players, and the competition to get into an orchestra is so high that they have to be really, really good players.
Yeah. I remember watching the Jurassic Park one, and then taking the subway, and then one of the players bringing in their I think it was the cello, and then bringing that along, and I'm like, and then I was telling that person, that was fantastic, and shouldn't you be in a limo? Or something like that. But yeah, so what do you feel about, like, do you feel that more composers in the future will be like Hans Zimmer and going on tour with their music, aside from the gaming industry? I'm not too familiar with the gaming industry, so I'm not going to get into it. But like, how do you feel? Like, I know Hans Zimmer does his tour. Do you feel that more composers will do that in the future?
I think it depends if you like being on stage or not. I think it has a lot to do with that. Are you inherently a performer? And clearly Hans enjoys doing that kind of thing. And he has quite the production, and he brings all the people that he uses regularly on the scores on tour with him. And I think it's terrific because it puts a personality. I mean, you can watch videos of Hans, of course, online. But to actually see him have the opportunity to have that experience of going and seeing him in concert, I'm sure is really exciting for fans of his music. And, you know, I think some composers may. I mean, certainly James Newton Howard has that background of being a performer. He used to be a keyboardist for Elton John, if I'm not mistaken. So if you have that leaning, I think it's great. If not, and John Williams, you know, he's a conductor as well.
Yeah.
And he conducts the Boston Pops and the like. So if you have that leaning, then I think it's great. If not, there are other venues, you know, like if you do a score that's really popular, just having it performed live is kind of like going on tour, I think. And there are actually, I think, some orchestras that are touring. The one that I saw at the Sony Center, I saw Harry Potter, the first film at the Sony Center. It was great. It's just fabulous. And, you know, the audience is so excited, and they're dressed up. And it's just so wonderful to see these composers getting their day, you know, getting recognized, as opposed to early days. I think it was kind of looked down upon. I know certainly when I was in music school, it wasn't even considered an option. You didn't even consider. You didn't talk about it. I knew I wanted to go and score films, but I didn't dare talk about it. I remember one teacher saying, "Oh yeah, he's a good composer that is playing something by someone," and he said, "Yeah, but he also did film scores." And I thought, right, note to self: keep quiet about your future aspirations here. So it's great to see that people recognize that these are really skilled, talented individuals who are working in a real pressure cooker, and they create some magnificent work. So yeah.
So what's in the future for Maria Molinari?
Oh, for me. Well, I just finished 3 projects, and we have some more clips here of some of it. So right now I'm in my downtime, I guess we call it. So I'm just kind of regrouping and rethinking things like workflow and the like. And I've been asked to do some concert music, which I've also done in the past. I got started there, so I've been asked to do a couple of works for a couple of artists, and considering that and seeing where that goes. So that, and seeing what comes next.
Nice.
A few irons in the fire, but nothing definite yet.
Nice.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at The Life of Jihad. Is that what it's called?
Oh, Little Miss Jihad.
Little Miss Jihad, sorry.
So put up Smile, if you would. That would be the first one. And this is the introduction of Sally Khan. And Sally, this film, first of all, the director is Stephanie Law and her partner Jessica Wu. And they co-directed this particular project. And I believe it was written by Stephanie Law. And it's about a little girl, Sally Khan. She's adorable, and her dad disappeared after 9/11.
Okay.
And she's decided that dad was a terrorist, and she wants to be a terrorist too, but she has no idea what it means. So this is picture day. And this woman who clearly doesn't want to be there, she's a journalist, she's been sent to cover Picture Day and interview the little kids about what they want to be. And it's the score right now, I guess it's one of the few scores I've done that are pure, in the sense that I drew just from orchestral, more or less from organic instruments, orchestral instruments. There's no actual synths in there. It's sampled instruments, it's all in the box, but no actual, soundscapey type stuff. And the music just kind of has this motor as she's asking, prattling on these questions, and then there are little flourishes that kind of enhance the character of the individual children.
Nice. So let's take a look at that.
Smile. Okay, no smile. Oh, please don't move. Okay. Smile. More. Okay, no smile. Smile. As you can see, we selected a special group for your article.
So, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Doctor, of course. Lawyer?
Really?
You got a problem with that?
So, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Mr. Sally Khan.
Does she know that?
Not yet, but she will soon.
Ah, you must be Sally. So what do you want to be when you grow up?
A terrorist.
Good, smile.
I love the photographer. He's totally clueless, not listening, so engrossed in his job. Yeah, good, smile.
So in that sequence, so it's like it's more of like it's like a comedy sort of a sequence. So did you, before you started doing a lot of comedy writing, did you actually go into somebody else who's done comedy beforehand, and then who was your influence for that, for comedy writing?
Yeah, well, definitely watching other comedies has been the thing to do. Elmer Bernstein's done some comedies that I really enjoy. So just watching lots of films and studying them and seeing how do people do that? How do they hit the right beats and enhance the comedy? So there was definitely some studying and some, in the orchestral environment, there are some little, I guess, gestures that are used or instrumentation that's used. So I made some very clear decisions. The clarinets sit always very nicely as a motor, and I've got them under there, and pizzicato strings are kind of like have that buoyancy to them, that lend and support comedy quite nicely. And then, of course, I used the flute. I had that association with Sally, and using the brass to punch up the character who who says you got a problem with that, that kind of thing, and having a little gesture in the woodwinds under the little boy who says he wants to be Mr. Sally Khan, because it kind of almost winks at the end, and you kind of had I had a little musical gesture that kind of enhanced the cuteness of that little thing.
So how many instruments Do you know how to play, or do you know how to play most instruments?
No. Well, I studied the flute and the piccolo when I was in high school, but I don't play them anymore. The classical guitar, I was, that was my primary instrument, which I don't really play anymore. It's mostly the keyboard. That's where, you've got the entire register, so you have the whole orchestra kind of at your disposal there. That's the most practical instrument. I did study the violin a little bit when I was in university. I took, when you do an education degree, which I didn't do, but you could take instruments to about a grade 2 level. So I thought, well, I've always wanted to understand how the violin works, and it's such a beast. It's so hard.
Yeah,
when I hear a fine player, it's like, wow, that's really something. I really admire any instrument. But I mean, in honesty, all instruments, to be able to play it well. Requires so much work, so much effort, so much discipline and practice. So yeah, you don't need to know how to play the instruments, but you do need to understand how they work. And just simple things like what's their register and how do they sound in their different tessituras, like their different ranges. Some instruments are really rich in the bottom, and like I think of the clarinet, it's got this register called the Chalumeau register, which is really sweet and warm. And then, but if you put it up in the higher register, which Prokofiev loves to do, it's absolutely searing, and it soars above the orchestra. It's got this really tense, tight sound, and it's amazing when you want that kind of thing. So you have to have that knowledge. And you speak to instrumentalists and make sure that things are, playable.
So I was watching a YouTube clip on I forgot the composer's name, but he did the composition for Gravity. And
yeah.
And then he was mentioning how at the end when they were putting it all together that he kept on like changing things and changing things and changing things and
sure
because the director didn't want that or the sequence wasn't right or something like that, but he kept on changing. It took a long time. But he mentioned something like that. Do you as a composer, do you get yourself in sometimes in those positions where you got to go through and you got to edit or render it or do something differently?
Yeah, well, in the writing process, for sure. The film I mentioned earlier, To the New Girl, when I got started, we started with the theme, the main theme. And the producer told me, I want a tango. And she sent me as an example the Jailhouse Tango from Chicago, the play. A great piece. Yeah, check it out. It's really fantastic. But she sent that to me. So I thought, okay, tango. And of course, I'm immediately thinking, violin. A nice violin. In there, and so I did it, and I sent it off. She goes, well, you know what? It actually sounds a little too much like The Godfather to me. So I think I did maybe 7 different versions of that theme before I finally got approved. And it's part of it because it was also someone new that I was working with for the first time. It's getting inside their heads and understanding how they hear things, because you can keep trying to shoehorn an idea. And I tried to adapt the violin. What if I take it down a register? What if I, take out some of the notes? And just realizing at a certain point, it's just not going to happen. I just can't use this violin. It's not. And realizing that what she really wanted, because it was kind of an open mic situation, what she really wanted was something more raw. And a lead melody was actually not really, on a polished instrument was not the way to go. It was really more about the rhythm section and highlighting this piano that sounded, like a slightly, rough, not quite not a top of the line concert piano that you would hear at Roy Thompson Hall, but more of a club piano and the bass and the percussion and starting it differently with percussion, and that really resonated for her at that point.
Right.
And then things just kind of grew out of that, and I'm happy to say that I didn't have to do any more rewrites after that one. But the initial, you definitely have to do, you do your rewrites, even in commercials. I mean, when you present it, it should be a finished product. But sometimes the client, I did the first commercial I did was actually a really big production, only I just really didn't know about it at the time, but it was an international commercial, and it started, I think I did the first draft, I don't know if it was the end of July, beginning of August, and I went off on holiday and forgot about it and thought, well, I guess that's flown the coop, and came back at, I think it was the beginning of September, and found out, they actually like it, but could you change it and make this, make this fuller at the, can you make a fuller version? So I did, and then it was, okay, so they like the front end of this version and they want the back end of that version, and can you suture them together?
Right.
And so I had to do that. And then after that, the next shoe dropped, because the client said, well, what if we had live players? Would it make it better? And the music producer was like, yeah, of course it would, sure.
Yeah.
So then I got the call, so what do you want in the way of players? So that was a whole new, a new dimension, because I'd been writing as if I had unlimited resources.
Right.
And so I had to rethink, how do I orchestrate this, and how do I, I'd written for a double horn section, and realized, okay, I've got to preserve that. So we're going to have to do 2 passes of the horns. We're going to have them record one part and then go back and record the second part, because it just isn't right without both parts, and weeding out and deciding what to do. And a funny thing that happened on that recording session is that we had a live timpani player, and the timpani are the big drums in the orchestra in the back. There are 5 of them, of varying sizes. And I'd written this timpani part, involved, of course, the lowest drum. Why wouldn't you use it? And it wouldn't fit in the recording book. So we ended up rewriting the timpani part in order to accommodate what would fit. So it was quite funny. It was quite funny, but quite the experience. And that went through all of these different permutations before we finally got to the final product.
So talk about like do you audition just the same as actors do to get a gig? Yeah.
Sure. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you get, you have some, like David, for example, for Abhorrent. I'd already done 2 things with him. So he just came to me, and I was actually working on something else, and I was, so glad that he said, I'll wait until you're done, and we'll work then. So he came back to me, Stephanie Law from Little Miss Jihad. I just finished my second project with her after the quake. And so some people come back, and so you don't have to audition.
Right.
They already love what you do. And other times you hear about a project and you think, well, I'd really like to do that particular film. And you try, and sometimes you do something, you write something especially in that vein and send off a demo in the hopes that you've somehow hit the nail on the head, because you can't actually get to the person who's doing it. Maybe it's really early days even. They're still casting or shooting, and you can't get to the person. So and sometimes with a commercial, it's never de facto that I have the gig. It's always like a kind of cattle call. I never know how many other composers are actually doing a demo, but that's what we're doing. We're sent the footage, we're sent the commercial, and we're made to score it. And it has to be complete within itself. So it could, feasibly go to air as is. It's just a matter of feedback, and does the company like what you've just done, and do they select you? And then sometimes you need to make adjustments, and sometimes they say, no, that's great, just send us the stems, and that's that.
So tell us, for those who wanted to get into music composition, can you shed some advice to them?
Start right away, as soon as you can. Right now, everybody has the ability to shoot a film, with your cameras, with your phones, right?
Right.
So it's not like when I was starting out, where it was hard to get. It was still being done on film, and it was hard to find that initial project, that first person who would trust you.
Yeah.
I would say when you're in school, hook up with your friends who are making films, get practice. I mean, I think even just to get in to film scoring programs, I think you actually have to send in clips of your work. And actually, you can even find, I know one of my classmates, he got a clip from, I think it was Return of the Jedi, that hadn't been, it was a chase scene in the forest, and it hadn't been scored. So he took that and he actually scored it, and he recorded it with his school orchestra in Alabama, and put it up against the footage, and that was his audition material. So do that. Go to mixers. It's all about relationships, and it's about problem solving. That's what you're really doing. You're a filmmaker and you're a problem solver. So you have to be easy to work with. You have to be able to accept direction, and to accept that you might have to rewrite something, and that someone may not think that what you just did is as great as you think it is.
Yeah.
You know, you have to be willing. It's hard, and there's a lot of rejection. You're going to send stuff out. You're going to talk to people and say, hey, I'd really like to do your film. And it'll go to someone else, and you just have to kind of go with it and say, okay, that wasn't my film to score.
Yeah.
So that would be my advice. You know, really learn your craft, study films, write as much as you can, and put yourself out there. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Maria, for
You're
your
welcome.
time here at the Focus, and good luck with Abhorrent and
Thank you.
all the future projects you have. And please come and see us again next time. And again, thank you very much.
Thank you. And one last plug for
Yeah.
Abhorrent. Just for anyone who can't make it out to the festival, it will be playing on Fun Size Horror Shocktail Party on Amazon as well. So you can catch it there.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.